Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I rank the best insert card designs across all four sports for 1993. Before I put together this list, I didn't realize how different the different sports, the designs were for the different sports. You get kind of used to it when you're focused on one sport and then you move to the next and you move to the next, and you see a lot of similarities in certain areas, but there are other areas you just totally miss in its entirety. You don't realize there's kind of like a spirit that goes on in or in sports cards, sport by sport by sport. In certain areas you can see it, and then in other areas you just totally you gloss right over it. And it wasn't so much that I was surprised to see that there were differences. I knew there were differences. It was more a matter of how distinct the differences were, where I looked and I could see a theme I'd never seen before. When I did each sport, whether it's football or basketball or baseball or hockey, each one of those sports, I was just kind of in that frame of mind. But when I pulled out the top 3 or 4 cards from each sport and I laid them out, they were all very distinct. In fact, there's only one card design here that is replicated across any of the different sports, and it only shows up in one sport. So where in 1995 and 1996 we would see a lot of blending of designs, in 1993 there was still a lot of uniqueness that was going on, and it made for a real interesting exploration of these cards. All 4 sports are featured in this video, but I have 9 cards that are pulled aside. I have a top 5 and I have 4 honorable mentions, but there are 5 different card brands that are featured here, with only one company that is featured 3 times. So, and there is one company, or there is one release which has the presence of 2 different cards in this list, and another brand which shows up with 2 cards, one from each sport. So that's the kind of variety that we're looking at, where it's a really impressive array of different influences that come in across the span of all of these cards. So when I pulled them together and looked at them in a cross-sport reference, I was very impressed with what I saw in 2 ways. 1, because there was an interesting variety I didn't see coming, but 2, this list really does speak to my sweet spot, which is I like really fancy, nice cards. There are definitely times when a fancy card is just a little bit too much, and there's always a time for fun and playful cards. There's not a lot of playfulness here in this card set, or in this card release, because of the fact that in 91, everybody realized the game was increasing really fast. And in 1992, we saw kind of a new language of sports cards. 93 was when all the card companies were exploring that new language. And that's what we're looking at here, is a lot of different ideas from similar pieces. And so there's a lot of that you're going to see at the top end of the list. But thankfully, the list does start off with a couple of fun cards, where I start all of this off with the Team Pinnacle cards, specifically for football. Now, Team Pinnacle, of course, was done for all 3 sports. It was done for football, hockey, and baseball. And the baseball cards are the ones that don't really work too well. Hockey works better, but the football cards are in a whole nother conversation, because these just pop right out. They are tight shots and they have a lot of contrast, especially when you get color on the cards. The stipple art just really reads well on these cards because of the strength. And like I said, the other sports don't work too well because the images are too busy. But with stipple art, it's best if you can really focus in and make strong themes pop right out. And that's what occurs on the football cards. And the card design is meant to frame the subject matter, so that subject matter pops out, but the subject matter has to be able to pop out. And that's what the football cards do that the baseball cards don't. So for football, this definitely fits on this list. And this is one of the more fun cards. Also more fun is the next one up, which is the Football Fleer Rookie Sensations cards, which is not rookie cards. This is after the rookie season of these players, but these cards are all about just really celebrating that a player is on a team. And I mean, to more than just about any other card you're going to find, really. The cards, now, I do admit that the Carl Pickens card is unusually good. This is the height that these cards could possibly have. When you look at the rest of the set, it's a lot more varied, and a lot of the cards don't have as much appeal as you would otherwise see. But for me, when I approach sports cards, that's because I'm a sports fan. And I want to come in here looking at teams and players and the celebration of the game. That's my focus. I'm not interested in grading. I don't care about value. All of that stuff doesn't matter. I'm a fan of sports, specifically of football. But even when I look at a set like baseball or hockey, where I don't care about the sport, I still look at it as a fan, and I want to be thinking about the sport with the cards. I want the cards to have that feeling to them. And there aren't very many cards that have the type of excitement about being a fan of a team as these Rookie Sensations cards. If it was another draft year, this card set would be remembered very well if it had Bledsoe and Bettis, and it had Robert Smith and Curtis Conway and Garrison Hurst. If that was the collection of players that was on this list, this would be a set people would be talking about for decades if it was the right draft class, but it wasn't. Now, I'm probably giving these cards too much of a boost, a little bit too much emphasis being put on the logos behind the players. I just love the way that the logos come behind the players in that really focused, isolated way. So I really don't know exactly where this necessarily should go. I just happen to really like this card, so I'm putting it here in the honorable mentions. But moving on to the next one, now we're making a major shift into still a very playful card, but now we're getting into the cards that are just so well made, which is the only hockey card on this list, which is the Donruss Elite. And I mean, I've never liked the Donruss Elite cards in baseball. Even in 1993 and 1994, they were still, I understand the whole point of why people like them, but every time I look at them, I just go, why do I care? This is the card that's different though. And when I look at this card, it reminds me that Donruss was the innovative card company in baseball. Now, Donruss rarely looked like the innovative card company, but they were doing a lot of really impressive stuff. And this one here in hockey, if I had seen this in baseball, then I would have just absolutely been blown away by Donruss, but that's not the case. But when they came into hockey, this was the card that they came in with as their big insert, and it was a great card because it does. So at this exact same time, Pacific was making their Pacific Prism cards. And the Prism cards looked like an executive looked at some demo that somebody had given them of a new printing technology and said, print me some of those for our cards. But when I look at the Donruss card, this is totally different. Because here with this card, I look at this and I go, man, they really played around with how to make this card really come to full life. It's a different kind of prismatic surface, and it has a richer quality to it than the Pacific cards have. But the big thing is all of the intricate detail work that's inside. You've got the marble, you've got the cutaways so that you have the sparkle coming through all of that. Everything does such a great job of framing the player. The way that everything is done, this card is so cool, so impressive. It is a little bit overpowering. If the prism around the outside along the border, if that was toned down a bit, this card would be higher on the list. It is a little bit too much, and so the intricate components in the card can get kind of overpowered. That's why I have it here in the honorable mentions, but I mean, this is a very strong presence here in honorable mentions. And then when I move on, I go over to Upper Deck Basketball, the Michael Jordan Flight Team cards. And these cards are just really great. In many ways, these cards should be higher on the list, and in other ways, it should be behind the Donruss Elite. The card is just a simple, straightforward, full bleed card where you really get to see the background behind the player, and yet at the same time they have text somewhat overlaying it, adding an interest to the card, which makes this card very distinct and stand out. Because of all of that text kind of fuzzing out the background, it allows the player to be more pronounced. And in some of the cards, the player is very pronounced. In other ones, it's not quite as pronounced. But regardless, the way that the cards come across, it has a great simple elegance, and it has a very strong, interesting theme that it really does catch your eye and bring you in. Add to that the great logo. I love the way that it comes together. This has just enough creativity to give it a really interesting pop to it. And yeah, I love the way that it comes across. But that being said, this card is a little bit kitsch. It's not as flashy and overpowering as the Donruss Elite. It's more focused and simplistic. But when you get into the top 5, you're getting into a whole nother space of card design, one that I really do love. And it starts off with Fleer Ultra Football, the Ultra Stars cards. And here the card design is it's a full gloss card. It has a black and white background that is very much fuzzed in. And then they have the red and blue of an American flag that goes over the black and white, or the grayscale. And the way that that is combined together, it gives a really rich pop of color, some interest, and then working with the picture of the player in the middle of it, it works together as a really great composition. But the big thing is it's not overpowering. The flag is not there to be an obnoxious flag. It's there to be a backdrop to just kind of hint at the player. And one of the weird things about this is, why in the world is there an American flag on this? I mean, nobody needs to be told that real football is American because everybody else refers to it as American football. And it's not even the American sport. Technically, that's baseball. The reason that the flag is on here is merely that it is just a really effective design element that makes the card really interesting and really does do a good job of framing the player. But the thing that makes this card work is the gray on either side. Those bands on either side, they are the ones that pop out, and they grab your eye and pull you in, and then the flag just brings you right to the player, and you're focused on the player with everything else as just kind of peripheral vision. You're just kind of aware that it's there. It's so effective, looks amazing, and it's one of the most distinct cards because of the fact that there aren't a lot of cards with American flags on it. And like I said, this is not an obnoxious display of the flag. This is a very subtle one that's just kind of fused in a very integral way, which is just really, really cool. And then moving on to number 4, I move all the way from Fleer Ultra to Fleer Ultra, but in baseball. And with this one, this is their Strikeout Kings. And this is a card that is... This one's interesting because the background behind the player is amazing. I love it. It's gorgeous. Looks like a late 70s, early 80s record album. And the player is like an accent on the card. But here's the weird thing. It's almost like Nolan Ryan is honored to be placed on this great image. That's what's weird about this. Every time I look at the card, I go, that is the coolest card. And then I try to find out who the player is. That kind of reverse logic is not something that I very commonly see, and it's not something I would normally praise. But in this case, it actually does all the right things to an extent, because I do like it when the player is forward and first and foremost. That is typically what I'm looking for. And on occasions like this where that's not the case, I definitely do want to, typically I want to fault it. But I can't really fault it because I look at this card and I just go, dude, that's just awesome. I mean, it really is incredible that the card is better as a standalone card regardless of the player. So the players become, they're not in the way, but you can't really see them. And I don't care. I just love the way the card looks. So it's a guilty pleasure of mine, but still, it is a very impressive card. But at number 3, now we're shifting over to a card that is absolutely about the player. And that is the Pro Set Power All-Power Defense cards. And this is simple. It's a portrait of a player in front of a school portrait backdrop. Except it's not truly a portrait of the player, it is an action portrait. So this is a cutout shot of a player who is actually on the field, engaged in being on the field. There's that menacing quality that you get to feel with the defensive player. And then that is backdropped by the school portrait backdrop that is a perfect combination, which really does focus in on the player like a portrait. And then you add the holofoil at the top on either side. The combination of all of this, for me, makes this such an amazing, almost perfect card. Every time I look at it, I'm bowled over by just how powerful the player feels on the card and how really nice it all comes across. So it does an amazing job of playing an interesting trick that makes the card really endearing. And I wish they had done more than just defensive players, but still, for defensive players, I love that they did this card. So absolutely love it. But if you want to make a card to really enunciate a player, there's another option you can go with, which is what I have at number 2 with Leaf, with their Frank Thomas collection cards. And in this case, this is a card where it's all about Frank Thomas. It's well-selected images, but instead of having most of him featured on the picture, which is what you're used to, they have a black band at the bottom that fades into an image, and then he has a tendency to be more on the sometimes it's like a full shot, sometimes it's just the upper portion, but at any rate, they choose images which are very focused, very tight in there, kind of like I was talking about with Team Pinnacle. It has a similar quality. And then you just have some holofoil down at the bottom. It's just very, very, very well made. And it comes through very bold. The black is a big part of it. The black box is what really makes the card all work, because it has a big presence and yet you hardly even see it. It does both at the same time. And because Frank Thomas played for the Chicago White Sox, he has a lot of black in his uniform, so it works with that. Does all the things it needs to do, and it just looks gorgeous. This is the way that you do a card set of an individual player. In fact, when I look at this, I think about the 1992 Ultra Career Highlights cards, where they did a great job of really focusing in on a player and showcasing him in a pretty, not quite clunky, but a very compressing kind of a space where he is framed. It's marble, he is framed, but it looks so good. And then in 1993, Ultra did not improve upon that. They went in another direction. But when I look at this card here in Leaf, this is the card that to me looks like the next generation of what they did in 1992 with Fleer Ultra. So, love these cards. But if you really want to make an amazing, amazing card to showcase the career of a player, look at Mr. June. This is a card set looking at Michael Jordan's career, his long-lasting career all the way through 3 championships. He's retiring. Time to celebrate a true legend. And how do you design a card set to really present a true legend like this? Well, this is how you do it. Number 1, great image selection. Look, this is Upper Deck. Upper Deck, Michael Jordan was their guy. He was their guy. They had tons of great images about him. And so they were able to pull from them and really make sure that all of the cards in this set had great shots. But then, right down at the bottom, they have a really interesting and amazingly well-designed design theme, which has the red and the black that are fading together. You have a little bit of gold foil for the logo, just beautifully articulated. And this is an incredibly unique, rare look at a card in 1993. It's way too advanced for 93. The reason you don't really notice how complex it is because in 96, 97, 98, 99, this is the way that a lot of cards were done. And so it looks kind of run-of-the-mill for later on, but for 1993, this was so bold and powerful. It's the kind of card I look at and I am honored to be able to collect it. It has that kind of a power. The card design itself is way beyond a 1993 standard, and it reads so well. But every time I look at it, I do know that this is a special card, and so I'm able to appreciate it in the right way. So it's kind of like looking at a Ford Taurus in the mid-'80s and going, it looks like a 90s card. Yes, it definitely does look like a 1990s car, but it's in the 80s, very different. And this kind of has that same quality where we would see a lot of cards in the 90s and the 2000s that looked like this years later, but this one here is just so intricately designed, you got to take the time to really give it the opportunity to impress you. I love it, and that's why I've got it at number 1 for all of the best card designs, or best insert card designs for 1993. So let me know your thoughts down below with your list of the rankings, how you would put everything, what you think should have been on this list, what you think should not have been on this list. Definitely let me know, I am curious. And I'm going to be moving on to rookie card designs for my next group, and then that's going to close out 1993. So then we can move on to 1994. And, well, I'm actually going to be kind of sad to move on from 93 because this has been a really good one. Regardless, if you haven't subscribed, I do urge you to do so. Do check out my other videos. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.